Domnule ambasador, anul 2016 a început cu o atmosferă de instabilitate, cu acțiuni de protest, cu critici pe alocuri destul de dure din partea europarlamentarilor, o atitudine rezervată din partea Comisiei Europene și cu sistarea suportului macrofinanciar din partea Uniunii Europene. Cu ce a culminat la finele anului 2016 dialogul politic dintre Uniunea Europeană și Republica Moldova?
Well, it has indeed been a very complex year from its beginning, and you mentioned already some of the sort of milestone events at the beginning of the year. Indeed, January, February was very, very difficult, and you also saw with the Council conclusions of the European Union in February that we came up with quite direct, quite strong messages, expectations. But we had already then taken a decision at 28, that we needed, despite the sort of problematic conditions in which the government was formed, we needed to look forward, not backward, not stay stuck there, because this country mattered too much to us, mattered too much as a partner. And if you look at what in fact has happened, so, I mean, you had the Council conclusions, you had certain expectations. Foreign Minister Galbur went to Brussels, I went with him. The idea of a priority action, reform action roadmap was sort of born from a meeting between Galbur and Commissioner Hahn. And then we had a high-level delegation from both the European External Action Service and the European Commission, who came here to continue that discussion. And by the time we had our Association Council in March, and Prime Minister Philippe made his first visit to Brussels, there was a timelined roadmap in place. Now, why I'm going through all this sort of technical detail is that this shows basically the philosophy we took in our relationship. We're not going to take things based on, how should I say, based on declarations such as pro-European or pro-Russian, but rather look at actions. We put our expectations on the table, things which we would pay attention to. The government responded to that. By the time we got to summer, we can say that a lot of the legislative work which was in the roadmap had been done. I don't like to talk about percentages because percentages give a too quantitative feel to reforms, but a lot of that had been done. At the same time, I think that our message was also quite clear that this has been good, these have been very important steps on the way forward. However, the legislative changes do not amount to that much unless they are truly implemented, unless the fight against corruption manages to deliver results which are seen by whom we consider our main partners, our leading partners, the citizens of this country, unless businesses feel that the justice system is working in a more equitable way, and I think the jury is still out to a quite large extent. Now, you mentioned macrofinancial assistance, and I think that here preparations are still ongoing. But let's go back a little bit and see what else happened. You may recall that we put our budget support payments on hold in 2015 because of the so-called 1 billion fraud, because of the banking crisis, because of other issues. And we said that with an IMF program, a substantial IMF program, we could restore confidence. And this was really a united EU position and underpinned also through our cooperation with the World Bank. Romania, a key EU member state, also conditioned the payment of the first tranche of the loan which has been agreed between the Republic of Moldova and Romania on what was called then the IMF staff level agreement, we said that we said that once we have a board level agreement, that means an agreement which has been already approved by the board and approved after rather stringent prior actions, that we could then look at resuming budget support payments, which is now happening at this moment. So I think that what you can see, if we're trying to do some kind of a bilan of this year, what you can see is that our relationship has become rather operative. It has become very honest, which I think is a very good thing. It's been founded on very clear benchmarks, expectations, and conditions. And you see this sort of interplay between that when the Republic of Moldova does something, we will do something in return. And all of this aims at building, very much in line with the European global strategy, building resilience in the country, strengthening the country's statehood, making the country stronger and better governed. So here you see positive steps. I do have to say, however, that there are some questions, because, for instance, on media ownership, if I look at the Council conclusions, there were questions on the freedom of the media. Those questions are largely still remaining. There were questions on the way the judiciary works, and where we have just had a human rights expert meeting between the EU and the Republic of Moldova, including the UN, the Council of Europe, OSCE, and we have been looking at a lot of issues also focusing on human rights, on the transparency of justice, on possible selective use of justice, on detention conditions, on the principle of pretrial detention, again in the media field. So I would say that if I look back at 2016, there have been positive steps in reforms, which still need to be transformed into real implementation. And but there have also been questions over the way the justice system and law enforcement agencies work. So, I mean, we're having a very open, honest dialogue.
În toamna anului curent, delegația Uniunii Europene a prezentat raportul de analiză comună, în care a fost descris în detalii situația în 13 domenii importante pentru activitatea acestui stat, cu referire la problemele, dar și posibilele soluții pentru aceste probleme. Eu m-aș opri asupra unei singure cifre. În 2014, din tot suportul financiar acordat de Uniunea Europeană și țările Comunității Europene, 20% au fost direcționate spre democratizarea guvernării. În ce măsură credeți că acești bani au fost utilizați eficient?
Let's look. I mean, there is the joint analysis, and the joint analysis gives a very good picture of how we collectively, all EU member states represented here and Switzerland, see developments in the country. You are taking out of that one figure, and here I would like to make a little bit of reference also to the report of the European Court of Auditors, which shows that, unfortunately, the use of our funds, especially on issues such as justice sector reform and others, have not been quite as effective as we would have liked them to be. Now, there are two elements here, and one element is the question of political will locally, and a question of the government really taking ownership of these reforms and pushing them forward. The other one is, of course, the design of the program. And I think that we all collectively agree that this funding could have or should have brought much more concrete outcomes. And I'm not denying that in any way. At the same time, I think that we're in a process, as in all policy processes, where lessons are being learned. And I just described to you this year and the way our relationship is evolving. I mentioned the Council conclusions, I mentioned benchmarks, I mentioned sort of an expectation of real tangible reforms. I mentioned the IMF program, prior actions, many of them in the banking sector. So I think that we can say that we are sharpening the way we are doing our part of the policy, and already the conditionalities which were put in place together with the IMF program show that. We're also in a process, and Commissioner Hahn has spoken about this, of looking much more closely on how our assistance delivers tangible results to the population. Now, this having been said, I would also say that a lot of assistance is very difficult. The results are very difficult to sort of quantify, because if you look at things like justice sector, administrative reforms, others, what we have seen in the justice sector are, for instance, moves towards the optimization of the judicial map, which means less courts, which means less possibilities of influence on a judge, random case management systems, which are not working quite as well as we would want, and so on. But when you put these things in place, you don't immediately see tangible results. That's something which you need to follow up. And here I would say that if you look also at the sort of funds which you're mentioning, which would go for governance and democratization, it is this sort of rather difficult interplay, and I've spoken about that earlier, that when you build a relationship with your counterpart, when you build a relationship with the government, you build it based on what you are told that your counterpart, your partner, wants to do. And let's be honest, the quality of strategies, the quality of policy papers, others, in the Republic of Moldova has been consistently very, very high. And of course, based on such high quality strategies, the logical thing for the European Union has been to commit funds. Now, when you do that, when you take that decision, you're usually not in a position to evaluate how will this go, let's say in a year from now, how does the implementation go? If you look at, for instance, budget support payments, you do not pay full tranches if there are shortcomings in the implementation, because you first, with budget support, you first expect results, and then you decide how many results have been reached. But then you also, so when we say 200 million, let me also note that by far we have not paid 200 million. We have not paid on things where we haven't seen the results which are needed. We're talking about commitments here. That's one point. Secondly, we do realize that maybe a certain amount of closer look at future policy matrices would need to be done. And thirdly, as you see, as I mentioned with this year, and when I mentioned about that more honest, more direct relationship, we have already, I think, moved past a trust, a belief in declarations and strategies, and are going much more into a sort of performance-based relationship.
Ați pomenit și de furtul miliardului, v-ați referit și la raportul Curții Europene de Conturi, în care se spune că banii oferiți nu au fost tocmai eficient utilizați și în același timp, în timpul vizitei la finele lui noiembrie curent a prim-ministrului Pavel Filip la Bruxelles, A fost sonorizat că vor fi deblocați în scurt timp cele 45 de milioane de euro pentru diverse proiecte, precum va fi oferit și un suport macrofinanciar în valoare de 100 milioane de euro, 40 de milioane dintre care sunt sub formă de grant. Probabil mai mulți dintre conaționalii noștri se gândesc la faptul ce siguranță există că nu va mai urma un furt al miliardului. Cine și cum va gestiona acești bani? În ce măsură Uniunea Europeană va fi implicată în monitorizarea corectitudinii utilizării lor? Corecte acestor bani.
Okay. Thank you for that question, because it's in fact one which gives me a bit of a platform of explaining how certain things function. Now, let's start with the 45.3 million, if I remember. It could have been a higher sum, but we do see in terms of policy matrices that in certain fields we have not got into a full implementation of these issues. So, I mean, I think that that's already a safe thing to say, that this is payment for things which have already been done. Secondly, when the IMF program was approved, the IMF program needs to be based on a realistic budget. So without a commitment from the European Union to support that budget this year with that 45 million and so on, the IMF program would not have been possible either. So, I mean, this has been very carefully coordinated with the International Monetary Fund. If you look at the prior actions which were required for an IMF program, you see certain very important steps in legislation in the supervision of the banking sector which need to be implemented. You've already seen certain moves on the three banks under special supervision, both in their internal workings, and also in the future, especially of one of those banks. There's a quite strong bit of action taking place. So here you see that already these changes in banking sector governance are there precisely to structurally prevent what happened with the billion to happen again in this country. Now, you mentioned macrofinancial assistance. Important issue. What was discussed in Brussels was that the European Commission starts preparing a package of macro-financial assistance with the sum you mentioned, 100 million, of which 40 million in grants. There will be conditions for this tranche, for this assistance, very clear conditions. And a very clear tie is with the implementation of the IMF program. And this IMF program, from what I know of it, is in fact an incredibly ambitious one, because it goes to governance issues. It goes to issues which are sort of major. It goes to major issues. It's not just sort of the typical balance your budget kind of stuff. It's much more structural. The first review of that program will now be will start in February 2017. If I look at the macrofinancial assistance, the payment of macrofinancial assistance is conditioned already to the fact that this important reform program, the IMF program, stays on track, that its implementation stays on track. If the program's implementation gets derailed, well, it will be very difficult, if not impossible even, for us to pay. The second thing is that we have put quite sort of strong conditionality in place on budget support payments. And we saw now IMF program after the prior actions, and 45 million gets paid. There may be some more money coming early next year, but I would imagine that we will continue keeping a link between reforms especially between macrofinancial stability and hence between the implementation of the IMF program and that program, reform program, staying on track, will keep that link between that and future payments as well. So I think that you see that the EU will have a very hands-on approach in looking how the money is spent, but with budget support, it is we do that basically by trying to follow the transparency of the budget and public finance management in general, but as, in fact, payments come after the reforms have been done, and we will keep a very close eye on how the IMF program is being implemented. So I think that this sort of, the parameters of our very close partnership, where we really want to help the Republic of Moldova develop, transform, go forward, and those parameters which were established in 2016 are parameters which will govern our policy also in the future.
După intrarea în vigoare provizorie a acordului de asociere și a celui de liber schimb, volumul exporturilor pe piața europeană a crescut cu circa 13%, atingând o cotă de aproximativ 64% din volumul total al exporturilor produselor moldovenești. Însă, în același timp, ar fi cazul să menționăm că structura acestor exporturi este cu preponderență una industrială, în timp ce Republica Moldova rămâne o țară agrară. Deci o bună parte dintre fermieri au rămas cu produsele lor agricole, alimentare, doar pe piața internă. În opinia dumneavoastră, care sunt impedimentele principale și cum ar putea fi acestea depășite în anul care vine cu efortul comun atât al autorităților de la Chișinău, a producătorilor și al delegației Uniunii Europene?
First of all, I would say that the development of exports to the European Union is really a very good bit of news. 64%, that's big, that's important. There is, as you mentioned, there is space for further growth. Now, I would tie this into the overall reform process and into the overall modernization, which you cannot escape in any way, shape, or form. First of all, we need to see that the functioning of the, if you talk about farm products and alimentary products, the functioning of the National Food Safety Agency, ANSA, is one where further development is needed, but also on the side of agricultural producers, many more further steps are needed. I'd say that the pioneers are already there. Quite a few have already taken very important steps. Now, one of the things why I'm so happy that this budget support blockage is over because of the IMF agreement is that we can, for instance, start to pay the so-called NPARD support for the agricultural sector. This is basically a subsidy scheme. But it's a very specific scheme in that it is one where we hope that funding, and we insist that funding which goes through IPA to agricultural producers, will indeed be used for standardization, for modernization, for cooling facilities, for packaging facilities, others, that kind of things which will facilitate exports into the EU market. Now, this modernization is absolutely necessary. The traditional markets on which the Republic of Moldova has been trading have been, in a way, what I'd call easy markets, in that quality has been, the standards have been less. Our consumer expects a much more sort of ready packaging. Through the association agreement, we've in fact helped the Republic of Moldova quite a lot in order to put in place into Moldovan legislation, through legislative harmonization, the same sort of rule book as you have in the European Union. That's a huge help, because in many other free trade area situations, okay, you open the market, but then somehow producers will have to find the standards themselves. Now the standards will be also domestic standards. this modernization also is the kind of modernization which will in fact help exports to whatever market, because Europe is a major standard setter. Now, there's an enormous amount of financial assistance to agricultural producers, small and medium-sized enterprises, others, from the side of the EU, our bank, the European Investment Bank, the EBRD. There are a lot of things available. Now, if I look at that, if I look at these programs, from the Filière du Vin, the wine sector, to the Moldovan fruit garden, from other facilities, SME facilities, and here we're talking for the whole region about really big sums, one of the things which needs to work when you go into a relationship between the private sector here and the European Union and international donors in general, you need to have a banking sector which in fact can work. Now, if you look at the cost of the 1 billion issue, you saw interest rates back in 2014-15 rise to over 20%, which means that even if these were subsidized lending schemes, which we had, we and our sort of close European family members, as I say, had in place, and certain member states as well, it was very difficult to put a subsidized lending scheme with that kind of a level of interest rates, because even if the interest rates which people need to pay were lower, they were still exorbitantly high. Now you have seen a drop in interest rates. You also see a rehabilitation of the Moldovan banking sector. This is where the IMF comes in a very important manner, which means that the Moldovan banking sector will probably be more resilient, better, and more professional in the future. It will hopefully have fit and proper ownership structures, good governance structures, banking supervision will work better. And that also means that for all the kind of financial assistance schemes and loan schemes, the banking sector will be better positioned to put in place these lower interest rate loans, and the disbursement rates, which have been very low, can be brought up. So I do see that there's a lot of good things in the pipeline, but and I do see that there's a lot of enthusiasm from the side of Moldovan producers. We need to get the infrastructure, the will, and the skill together, and the financial infrastructure, the will, and the skill together. And I'm sure that this investment which Moldovan producers need to be made, it may feel like a big investment now. In the long run, it's a very profitable investment.
Pentru prima dată în 2016, Uniunea Europeană a oferit un suport financiar în valoare de 6,5 milioane autonomiei Găgăuziei și raionului Taraclia. Este vorba de programul SART, susținerea agriculturii și dezvoltării rurale în UTA Găgăuzia și Taraclia. În același timp, se știe foarte bine că atât autoritățile de la Comrat, cât și o bună parte a cetățenilor de acolo manifestă o pledoarie pro-integrare euroasiatică. Care a fost scopul acestui proiect și care sunt așteptările?
Well, I think that we are all, on the whole, extremely committed to equitable development in all parts of the Republic of Moldova. And the Gagauz autonomy, Taraclia, are very important parts of the country. Gagauzia has a special status through autonomy. And if you look, the European Union already now, I mean, we and the member states are the largest donors to the Gagauz autonomy. Now, what we expect to see is, for this money, which you mentioned, and there's, by the way, another program in the pipeline of a direct grant to local authorities in Gagauzia. We hope to see development in many fields. I mean, if you, we're looking at capacity building of the local authorities, I mean, of the Gagauz authorities, that's one thing. We're looking at small-scale infrastructure, local infrastructure projects. This is going to be very important, but we're also looking through the SARN and through what we have in pipeline of giving concrete assistance to the development of economic planning and development planning in Gagauzia. So what we would like to see as results is that people in Gagauzia and Taraklia will have more opportunities in life, will have a better possibility of building their economies, building their futures, building prosperity, and doing that, and through doing that, seeing also the benefits of a modern rules-based society, which I think is very, very important. Seeing the benefits of what we're doing. I'm not going to geopoliticize at this moment this support. I already said that by far the European Union, we as EU institutions, our member states, in fact, Romania in the first place, are donors to Gagauzia. Turkey is quite high, but then I think in addition to that, there isn't that many other foreign players who in fact give anything concrete to Gagauzia or Taraklia. We hope to see development in this important part of the Republic of Moldova.
Chiar dacă am face abstracție de opțiunile geopolitice, oricum ar trebui să menționăm că aproximativ aceeași atitudine există și în stânga Nistrului. Sunt acceptate ajutoarele financiare. Partea stânga Nistrului, în pofida înțelegerilor care au fost sonorizate până la asta, continuă să beneficieze de regimul comercial preferențial autonom. În același timp, nu întreprinde nicio măsură sau prea puține măsuri pentru a identifica o soluție de reglementare a conflictului în cadrul unui stat integru. Mai mult decât atât, la reuniunea Consiliului Ministrilor OSCE, care s-a desfășurat la începutul lui decembrie la Hamburg, a fost adoptată o declarație prin care toate părțile implicate sunt invitate să continue negocierile în formatul 5+2 pentru a identifica în măsura posibilităților o soluție durabilă. În opinia dumneavoastră, cum apreciați situația curentă și ce speranțe aveți pentru reglementarea acestui conflict?
Okay, well, I'm just in fact back from Hamburg, or I was back from Hamburg a while back because I was part of the negotiations for that Transnistria declaration, was there too, so know the declaration relatively well in and out. Now, if you look just at realities on the ground, we mentioned how much the Republic of Moldova exports to the European Union. In fact, if you look at the Transnistrian region, if you look at Transnistria, the export figures to the EU are about the same as with the rest of the country. You see Transnistrian businesses working actively on the EU market, and I very much laud the decision of Chișinău back in 2015 to find a common way forward between Chișinău and Tiraspol, and I laud Tiraspol as well, on trade facilitation through which the Transnistrian exporters could be part of the benefits which the Republic of Moldova has on the European markets. Now, I think there is a lot which needs to be done on the Transnistrian conflict, and I think that we are seeing that many have said that this is the easiest sort of situation of such to solve. I'm not sure if it is, because I mean it's been there for a long time, but it is if you look at the building blocks. You don't have an ethnic conflict. That's one thing. I do see that Russian media, others, are trying to turn certain things more onto the ethnic side, but Moldova is a multi-ethnic, multicultural country in any case, and I think that here one needs to look at overall inclusiveness of the country. I mean, that's one which we've said quite clearly. We do see that it is important to work towards a vision. To work towards a vision of a special status, and here Chisinau, in a way, has to take a lead, because we're talking about, I mean, what the international community has said is that we need to find a solution based on the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Republic of Moldova with a special status for Transnistria. That's the sort of formula. Confidence and trust needs to be built more and more. The populations, as I said, on the two banks are not that different. I mentioned the economic interests, so on and so forth. So I think there needs to be a mixture of vision, political will, pragmatism, because, as I said, the economic interests are together, and the way for Transnistria to benefit from those economic interests, and here it's important that Chisinau remains, as I say, generous, but the way for Transnistria to benefit from the global market is through the Republic of Moldova, through in the context of the Republic of Moldova. You need to build small steps. You need to work on small steps. I mean, we're very happy that the 5+2 process could restart in 2016, thanks to the very important efforts of the German OSCE chairmanship. We saw in Berlin in June the signature of the Berlin Protocol. There were steps there, small steps, on environment, on the apostillization of diplomas, on circulation of motor vehicles, others, which would, in fact, if realized, I hope that this work will continue, if realized, would, in fact, build up the opportunities of residents of Transnistria within the Republic of Moldova and through the Republic of Moldova. And I think that these are very important steps which need to be looked at. So I think that I'm not seeing sufficient dynamism in the process. I would like to see a more results-oriented dynamism in the process. But I'm just sort of saying that there are building blocks on which, with the right amount of political will and the right understanding on how important it is to find that political will, things can be moved forward.
În 2016, după 20 de ani, pentru prima dată cetățenii Republicii Moldova au avut un scrutin prezidențial. În rezultat a fost ales cu majoritate de voturi un candidat care în mai multe rânduri a declarat că acordul de asociere și liber schimb a produs doar daune economiei Republicii Moldova și că acesta va depune tot efortul pentru desfășurarea unui referendum, în rezultatul căruia să denunțe acordul de asociere. Pe de altă parte, autoritățile de la Chișinău, mă refer la guvern și la majoritatea parlamentară, susțin că împuternicirile șefului statului nu sunt pe atât de mari încât să facă această turnură, iar ei, la rândul lor, asigură continuitatea dezvoltării vectorului european. Pe de altă parte, mai există un al treilea actor în acest triunghi, societatea moldovenească, care este destul de polarizată la moment. În opinia dumneavoastră, ce trebuie să se întâmple în 2017, dar și în 2018, până la următoarele alegeri parlamentare, astfel încât, cu adevărat, întreaga societate sau cea mai mare parte din societate să susțină acest vector european de dezvoltare?
Okay, I think that there are a number of elements which I think should be taken into consideration. The first is this whole question of polarization. It is very interesting when you scratch a bit further, when you talk to people, and I, in fact, do talk to Moldovan citizens quite a lot in different parts of the country, both Russian-speaking, Romanian-speaking, majority, minority, pro-European, pro-Russian. And you realize that this geopolitical issue is not really the main issue. I mean, if you emotionally ask certain things, yes, you may get this or that answer. But when you start having a discussion, so how do you want to live? Do you want to live in a society of rule of law? Do you want to live in a society where the fight against corruption works? Do you want to live in a society which you own as a citizen, which is accountable to you? Then it doesn't really matter what people say, what they have declared in the first part. Then the answer is quite clearly, well, yes, I want to live in a democratic, modern society which respects me. European societies, I think, on the whole, and you can see that with the experience, it comes from our dark past, Second World War, before that, and so on as well, are societies which do exist for the citizens. No society is perfect, but they do exist for the citizens. And I think that people do realize that. At the same time, I would say that in this therefore I would say that this polarization has been instrumentalized. It's been fostered by media, it's been fostered by Russian media, but also some local media sometimes. There's been sort of this black and white picture of the world. It has gone very much into people's emotions. Now, our relations, the relations between the European Union and the Republic of Moldova are incredibly deep. We're cousins, let's put it that way. I mean, brothers, sisters, whatever. I mean, we're very, very close to each other. We have the association agreement. You just mentioned 64% of the exports. You look at other directions, and remember, the association agreement is not about closing the door to one direction. We don't close doors. It's sometimes, I have to say, others who close those doors, but we don't. We don't put in place embargoes based on political motivation. We have built within the association agreement a rules-based framework. These are the standards. We help you in reaching these standards. Our market is open. A renunciation, for instance, of the association agreement, I don't know what that would do to the free trade. Well, I know what that would do to free trade, at least in the short term. It would be a dramatic shock, which we would not want to see, a dramatic shock for the Republic of Moldova. So I'm not, in fact, looking at this structure. I'm, in fact, not very worried that any economically thinking person would in reality go and change certain things. As said, the country is a parliamentary country. But then you also see 2018. I personally think that the political debate you have in the country is much more domestic than geopolitical, and geopolitics is somehow dragged in. For me, our European geopolitics, if you want to see that, is the geopolitics of people living better. We launched the European Global Strategy. We talk a lot about the resilience of countries in that. We talk about principles and values and our interests being closely knit. Now, these are the kind of things which are my geopolitics. They're not about spheres of influence. They are about regions of prosperity, regions of people living better, having more opportunity. Now, getting to this, I've often said, and quoted a former boss of mine, whom I won't name here, but who said once in a country in this region, said, look, the important thing is to play by the rules, not with the rules. And if I look at the very honest relationship which we have forged which is about reforms which will be tangibly felt, which bring more investment, which bring more confidence of the business of international investors. I mean, EU is the main source of foreign direct investment in the Republic of Moldova, but the amount of this investment is by far not high enough. So if you look at this policy, so my answer is that I am that convinced that of the attractiveness, even in a time when somebody tries to say differently. And we need this discussion sometimes inside the EU as well. I am convinced that the richest, most prosperous, most democratic, most empowering part of the world, which is the European Union, will retain its attractiveness. And I don't think this should be about slogans. That attractiveness needs to be felt through reforms by the citizens, and here the leadership needs to be with the government in place. There are no shortcuts here, no declarations help. It's a matter of real reforms.
Și pe final de discuție, domnule ambasador, aș vrea să vă rog să veniți cu urări către telespectatorii postului Moldova 1, către cetățenii acestei țări, cu ocazia sărbătorilor de Crăciun și An Nou.
I would like to wish all my Moldovan friends, citizens of the Republic of Moldova, regardless of the way in the world they look, regardless of the language they speak at home, regardless of their religion, I would wish them very happy winter holidays, very happy New Year. I wish for them the start of a new year, 2017, which will show concrete results which they can feel. Reforms are never easy. There are sort of rough moments there. But if you feel that there's a perspective of a better life, of living better, then those difficult reforms are much more palatable as well. But you need to trust them. I wish you a year of growth, a year of happiness, and a year of prosperity, and look very much forward to being part of that. Mulțumesc. Spasiba.
Domnule Tapiola, vă mulțumim pentru acest interviu, pentru răspunsurile exhaustive și vă urăm la mulți ani.